trying to burn the Constitution. You have an eagle over there holding the American Constitution, and Jefferson is trying to grab that Constitution from American legal and put it on the altar of Gallic despotism. In other words, Jefferson was suspecting of being a Frenchie, to put it like that. Sympathetic to the French. It's not just that he liked the French. It's that he was in favor of a more radical revolution than the Federalists were, people like Hamilton, Adams, and George Washington. And Jefferson was not a moderate. He made some strange statement. I remember we had a discussion last time around, and I asked one of you guys, what does it mean when Jefferson says that, when Jefferson writes that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants? That's a famous statement by Jefferson, which could be interpreted in a good way and in a not so good way. In other words, in order to have liberty, you have to basically, kill some people occasionally? That is not a charitable way of interpreting that statement. Or it can be interpreted that in a more charitable way, that Jefferson was advocating greater freedoms and democracy, which was the way the American people took it and elected him as president twice. So Thomas Jefferson is contemporary to Napoleon. In other words, the presidency of Thomas Jefferson from 1801 to 1809 coincides with the Napoleon becoming first the president of the French Republic and then the emperor of the French people. We have here on slide number 14 a bust of Napoleon, a sculpture of Napoleon, where he's presented in the garb of a Roman emperor. And that's probably a good comparison. That's the comparison that he liked. But only that, it's Napoleon came to the French Republic and tried to save the Republic by turning himself not into a president but into an emperor. Anyways, Napoleon was a very maligned person, especially in the English world. The English hated him because they were at war with him, and so they made all sorts of stories about him, and how that he was small, tiny, a midget, which was not true. He was, I believe, 5'8" at that time, an average height. He was smelly and stuff of that sort. These were all propaganda elements that the British threw against Napoleon during the war. Napoleon was actually a moderate. In a way, you can say kind of like Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a radical Republican, or what you call Democrat. But there were people who were much more radical than Thomas Jefferson. And likewise in France, they were revolutionaries in France. Napoleon was a revolutionary. He became famous by actually, when he ordered the French artillery to shoot at the royalist rebels, and kind of then he crashed, destroyed, put down the royalist rebellion. So that's how he became famous. But it's quite a controversial thing to do, to order artillery to shoot into people. That's quite a spectacle to watch. So Napoleon was not among the radical revolutionaries. He was a revolutionary, but he wasn't extremely radical. One of the things that he did was to reconstitute the Roman Catholic Church in France, to allow churches that were taken over by this cult of the Supreme Being that we watched before, to go back to the Roman Catholic Church. And the symbolic, that happened in 1802, but the symbolic actually act that kind of made it known to the whole world was the coronation of Napoleon in 1804. Which happened actually Notre Dame in Paris, and where Pope was invited to officiate at the coronation of Napoleon as emperor. Famously, Napoleon didn't allow Pope to put the crown on his head. He put the crown on his own head, and then on the head of his wife Josephine. And that's the picture that I'm looking at right now on slide 15. But this was an attempt of Napoleon as a revolutionary to present himself as a moderate, as somebody who can work with other people, other monarchs in Europe. And that was also a task of Thomas Jefferson, who was quite a radical as a younger person. And then when he became president, he was also had a reputation of being quite a radical. But he had to deal with the daily issues of the government and politics, and to what extent he succeeded, it's a matter of debate. So the two men kind of found some common interest. Napoleon realized, I'm looking at slide number 16, a slide that's called Louisiana Purchase. So Napoleon realized fairly quickly that in the war between the French state and Great Britain, France would not be able to defend New Orleans and associated Louisiana territories. Now, to what extent the French really controlled the whole of Louisiana territory, which extends really, from down New Orleans in Louisiana all the way, up north in Minnesota and Dakotas and other places in between, Arkansas and Oklahoma and Missouri and Iowa and blah. No, they didn't, but they formally had a claim on the territory. The thing that was sold to Jefferson by Napoleon was the city of New Orleans, which Jefferson believed that New Orleans would be the city of the future. It's at the end of the Mississippi River that drains good chunk of the continent, probably 60% of the American continent, the waters from the American continents, from the Rocky Mountains in the west to the Appalachian Mountains in the east. All that basin is drained into New Orleans. So he thought that New Orleans, it was the city of the future. And so having New Orleans was extremely important to Jefferson and to many Southerners. Southerners were actually, the plantation society. that produced cotton. You put cotton on the ships, and you load those ships on the river nearby. Is it the Tennessee River or Ohio River or Missouri River or the Red River in Texas and so on and so forth? And you go down to the Mississippi River and all the way to New Orleans, and in New Orleans you sell that cotton into the world market. That was the core of the Southern economy, and that's why Jefferson thought New Orleans was really, really important for the Southerners. It turned out that this was not going to be, this going to go exactly as planned. When we talk about Erie Canal in a week or two, then you realize that actually most of the American trade is not going to go up and down the Mississippi River, but actually it's going to follow the Great Lakes and into the Hudson River and into the Northeast. But that's a footnote, a comment on Louisiana Purchase. So Napoleon and Jefferson made a deal. Napoleon said, okay, we'll lose it anyway, so let's get some money for it. And he couldn't find a better person than Thomas Jefferson, who they were fairly similar in terms of ideology and ideologies and inclinations. And he sold city of New Orleans and associated Louisiana territories to the Americans in 1803. Okay, so that was our slide number 16. Number 17, we have the beginning American involvement in the Franco-British War. That was overall the problem throughout this period. From the election of George Washington and the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789 till the end of Napoleon is which side America is going to pick. Jefferson tried to do something to impose an embargo in 1807. It was a general embargo on all foreign nations enacted by the United States. But the intention was to show United Kingdom and France during the Napoleonic War that they cannot violate America's neutrality, and therefore they'll be punished for that. In fact, the embargo had an exactly opposite effect. It was directed against the policies of Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton wanted to create a manufacturing industrial society in the North, in big cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia. And that society started to emerge. There were a lot of inventions and manufacturing going on in those society, and they were slapped by embargo imposed by a Southern president, Thomas Jefferson, which led to a considerable resentment up here in the North. Anyways, that was number 17. Number 18, we have the War of 1812. The War of 1812 actually happened under the successor of Thomas Jefferson, namely President James Madison, who really had continued the same policy as Thomas Jefferson. From the outbreak of the war with Napoleonic France, Britain had enforced a naval blockade to choke off trade to France. And since U.S. was trading with France, U.S. claimed that Britain cannot stop American ships for trading with France. Well, the British had the means to do it, and so they captured American ships. And since a lot of sailors on American ships were actually born as British subjects, they were then taken into custody. So America became increasingly hostile to Great Britain, and I would say foolishly, James Madison on June 18th of 1812 signed the American declaration of war against Great Britain, because Democratic Republicans in the House of Representatives were hell-bent to start this war. They presented this war as a great struggle for freedom and liberation, all this rhetoric that you get from people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. But there was actually a more mundane reason why they were interested in this. They were looking after Indian territories. There were chunks in the eastern part of the United States, that is east of the Mississippi River. There were good chunks of territories that still belonged to the Indians. They were looking at capturing Indian territories like Florida. Southerners were extremely interested in finding new land to expand the production of cotton. And foolishly, they thought that they could also invade Canada. The war was almost an absolute disaster for the United States. At least it was a disaster for northern United States, northern parts of the United States. Americans lost Detroit. There were other battles in an attempt to seize Upper Canada or Ontario, or a failed attempt to invade Lower Canada, or what is today Quebec, the city of Montreal. Those failed. Let me see. Let me turn now to I'm looking now at chapter 19. You have a propaganda poster of this war of 1812, where the British are accused of bribing the Indians to scalp American soldiers. But as I said, this was really a policy of the Southerners